How you doing, everybody? It's James Larson from 94.1 KRNA alongside Drew Knutson. He is a franchisee. You're an owner of a Mellow Mushroom down in Coralville, Iowa. And welcome to Craft 101. What we do on this podcast is we talk about craft beer. So, Drew, first of all, it's always good to have a beer with you. Next time, can you bring in some pint glasses, though?
I will.
Okay. All right. Well, we're talking IPAs. Why don't you tell everybody what IPA stands for? I had to look it up on the Wikipedia, but you tell everybody what it stands for.
Well, everybody's scared of an IPA because they think it's bitter, which sometimes it is. That's the English version. We're going to drink a beer early or a little bit later, James, and it's a session IPA, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The IPA, what's it stand for? Indian Pale Ale. And where did that come from? Well, it came from British-owned Australia at one time, and they took all of their prisoners down to Australia. It was a prisoner island way back in the day. They would obviously, the only form of transport obviously was a boat. They'd take a boat, they'd have a bunch of beer on the boat for the prisoner guards, and they'd always dock in India to refuel with food. They'd then take off again. When they got to Australia, the beer went bad. And nothing worse than a grumpy prisoner guard.
You're right about that. Now, Drew, I know people are going to ask me this, but what makes you an expert on these IPAs? I know your restaurant, you've got 74 beers on tap, but what makes you the aficionado?
Well, I don't know that I'm a true expert, James. I just have a lot of passion. We have a lot of beer, 74 beers on tap. I've been drinking craft beer for about 9 years now, and I keep learning something every day. And I just like to pass that on to my customers because craft beer is always bringing something new to us.
You talked about drinking a beer later. We're actually drinking that beer right now. Iowa Brewing, that's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it's the Iowa Brewing ZOINKS 4.5%. Alcohol by volume. Kind of reminds me of a Batman episode, ZOINKS. Where'd they come up with that?
Bam, pow, zoinks, right? The little call-outs. That's a lot of fun. That's where they came from. It actually, a little play on words, it doesn't pop you in the nose. This is a session IPA. A session IPA is going to be a lot lower in the hop flavor on your palate. So it's something that you definitely can enjoy while you drink it. 4.5%, you know, your domestic beers are in around that 4.2, 4.3%. So from alcohol standpoint, it's something that you can enjoy more than one of.
My producer handed me a note that said the food pairing, hearty vegetables. Come on, I'm not a guy that's going to eat vegetables, but I'm told spin dip. Your spin dip down there at the Mellow Mushroom probably goes pretty well with this.
It's surprising how you can actually pair food with beer, and either it makes the beer better or makes the food better. But yes, they say anytime that you're using a session IPA, go with a hearty vegetable. Our spin dip is a great choice.
One of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, you and I do our weekly or daily radio bit. I was always afraid to try these IPAs, these craft beers. I'm a Bud Light, Miller Lite guy, but it's kind of nice. You've really brought me out of my safe zone here, and I'm trying some beers that I really enjoy. So what for people that are watching this, that are like me, it's like a lot of them are probably scared with the alcohol by volume too. You brought in one the other day that was like 10% or something crazy. So what do you say to those people that are just thinking about having one of these, but are maybe a little hesitant to do so?
Well, and that's why we're doing this podcast, right, James, is because I don't want people to be afraid. There is a proper way to start. The very first IPA I ever had, I said, I'm never going to drink this beer ever again. So you got to start at the right level. A session IPA, a pale ale. We'll have several of them on this podcast that you can check off and write down to remember, especially here if you're in Iowa. You'll find Iowa Brewing ZOINKS in a lot of places, especially at Mellow Mushroom. If you start the right level, it's a lot easier then to understand what craft beer is about.
Yeah.
And then you can start to learn more about what your palate is going to like.
Going to put you on the spot. I probably should have told you this beforehand, but you've got 74 on tap down there. How many craft beers are there? Is there hundreds, thousands? How many different types of beers are there in this line of beer, if you will?
Tens of thousands.
Really?
James. Yeah.
And it's not slowing down. Why is that? Why is that?
Because I think always somebody is always looking for something fresh and something new, and they always flavor. We're going to go into seasonal beers here in a little bit. There's always something fresh and new. One of my favorite seasonal beers, Tallgrass out of Kansas, they make a key lime pie beer.
Oh, man, you're talking my language there.
Well, some people are like, there's no way. We put a graham cracker crust on the top of the glass, and this beer, the finish, tastes exactly like a key lime pie. So if you like a key lime pie, it's a wonderful beer. It's amazing what they're doing with beer nowadays.
In wrap up here, and if you look at Drew, we'll flip the camera back on him. You drink beer. Yeah, 74 beers on tap. You get all this pizza. How do you stay so thin, my friend? How do you do it? Are you exercising right after you eat and drink? What's going on, brother? What's the trick?
I suck my gut in a lot, James. That's what I try to do. But no, other than that, craft beer does have calories. There's no doubt about it. Everything we put in our body obviously have calories, but it's all in moderation. These beers have so much flavor. Alcohol content is usually higher, so you're not drinking 4 or 5. You're usually drinking 2 or 3.
What are you going to bring me next week? We're doing this again next Friday. What are you going to bring me in? Something totally different? Something totally... what's it going to be?
I'm going to bring you a dark beer. I'm going to surprise you next Friday. We're still in the winter here
Right.
in Iowa. It's going to get really cold here, and so the darker the beer, the better when it's cold.
I lied. I have one more question for him. Speaking of the wintertime, it's almost Christmas. Are there seasonal IPAs that people drink certain times of the year?
Not necessarily IPA, but definitely seasonals. They call them winter warmers,
Oh, sure.
or they just call them seasonal. The Sierra Nevada Celebration, you'll find a lot of places. That is a great winter warmer ale. So give that one a try.
All right. We call this segment Craft 101. That's Drew Knutson from the Mellow Mushroom. And tell folks where you're at if they're in the Midwest and they want to get some good pizza.
We're right off Interstate 80, goes right through the center of Iowa. We're right there in Coralville, exit 240. Get off exit 240. We're right next to Target. You can't miss us. Come visit us. Mention the KRNA tap handle, and you'll get a $2 beer.
And it's in the middle of a mall, so there's plenty of parking. You don't have to worry about that. Drew, thanks so much, and we appreciate you clicking on this podcast. We'll see you next week right here on Craft 101.
Cheers, my friends.